You've seen them on your screen for years. Rick Harrison with his calm, business-like voice, always ready to make a deal. Chumlee with his funny, light-hearted attitude, always making people laugh. Every episode of Pawn Stars gave viewers a little window into their lives inside the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop. From rare coins to old guns, vintage guitars to ancient books, the show became something more than just a place to sell items. It became a part of people's routine. Families watched it together, fans quoted their favorite moments, and everyone felt like they somehow knew the cast personally. But the real magic of the show was not just the items that came into the shop, it was the people. Rick, with his smart decision-making and serious style, was the perfect person to run the shop. He looked like a man who had everything under control. Chumlee was the opposite, but in a good way. He was the one who brought fun, energy, and laughs. People connected with him because he felt real, like someone they knew in their own lives. These two, along with the rest of the crew, made Pawn Stars feel like more than a reality show. It felt like a small piece of Las Vegas was right in your living room. Over time, Rick and Chumlee became more than just reality TV personalities. They became celebrities. Fans lined up outside the pawn shop just to catch a glimpse of them. They were invited to events, featured in magazines, and talked about online. But even with all that attention, they kept working at the shop, making deals and telling stories. To the audience, it looked like life was going great for both of them. That's what makes this whole situation so hard to believe. When someone you've watched for years suddenly ends up in a serious scandal, it feels personal, like you've been lied to, or like the image you believed in is suddenly gone. For fans of the show, the news didn't just feel shocking, it felt heartbreaking. People always wonder what their favorite stars are really like off camera. Are they as kind, funny, or clever as they seem? Do they live quiet lives when the cameras are off, or is there something darker going on that the show never showed? For Rick and Chumlee, no one ever really thought to ask. They seemed honest. They seemed harmless. That's why this story hit so hard. It came out of nowhere. No one expected that something this serious could ever be linked to two people who brought so much entertainment to millions of viewers. Fans were left confused, asking questions. Was it all just an act? Were the warning signs there and no one noticed? What happened to the people we thought we knew so well? That's the power of television. It can make strangers feel like friends. It can take a man who runs a pawn shop in Las Vegas and turn him into a household name. But it can also hide things. Things that are messy, personal, and hard to believe. Things that don't fit into a 30-minute TV episode. As more and more news came out, people started digging into the past. Old interviews, past behaviors, things that once seemed normal started to look different. It's like when you finish a mystery movie and you go back to re-watch it, noticing clues that were always there but didn't mean anything until the big reveal. That's how fans started to feel. Suddenly they were asking if there were signs of trouble all along. But the hardest part for most people was the feeling of disappointment. Rick and Chumlee weren't just characters on a show. They were part of something bigger, a connection that fans had built with them over years. They represented hard work, family, and second chances. And now all of that seemed to be falling apart. Still, there was curiosity. Curiosity about what really happened, about what went wrong, about who was responsible. Everyone wanted to know the truth, but no one was getting the full picture. The headlines were dramatic, the stories were full of holes, and no one could tell for sure what was real and what was rumor. That mystery pulled people in even more. It made them re-watch old episodes, read old articles, and follow every new piece of information that came out. Everyone wanted answers, not just for the sake of gossip, but because they wanted to understand how two of their favorite TV personalities ended up in such a dark place. People don't just want entertainment, they want meaning. They want to know that the people they support are worthy of their time and attention. And when that image breaks, it doesn't just hurt, it leaves a space where trust used to be. For Rick and Chumlee, that space may never be filled again. Even if they explain everything, even if they try to clear their names, the damage is done. The perfect image is gone. The simple world of buying and selling rare items has now been replaced by courtrooms, lawyers, and headlines. But still, people are watching, waiting, hoping that maybe there's more to the story. That maybe, just maybe, there's something we all missed. Because when you've seen someone on your screen for years, it's hard to accept that the story is over. But behind the scenes, something dark was brewing. It's a strange feeling when someone you've watched for years suddenly becomes part of a scandal. You start asking yourself questions. Could this be real? Were they always hiding something? Why didn't anyone see this coming? That's exactly what fans of Pawn Stars felt when they heard the news about Rick Harrison and Chumlee. The calm, funny, and friendly faces from the show were suddenly at the center of something serious and unexpected. The public image of Rick and Chumlee was always very clean. They made deals, shared history lessons, and had fun on camera. Rick always came off as smart, wise, and in control. Chumlee, on the other hand, seemed like the guy who didn't take things too seriously but had a good heart. It didn't matter if the item being sold was a $10 toy or a $100,000 sword. The team always handled things in a professional way. Nothing about them looked dangerous. Nothing about them felt dishonest. That's why when whispers started spreading online and small headlines started popping up, most people didn't take them seriously. Some thought it was just internet drama. Others believed it was a fake story made for clicks. After all, why would Rick and Chumlee do anything to risk their careers, money, or reputation? But the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. Slowly, more details started coming out. At first they were small, a legal document here, a police report there. Nothing confirmed the full story, but there was enough to make people stop and think. Fans who once laughed at Chumlee's silly mistakes were now reading serious reports about his private life. Rick, who always looked confident on camera, was now being mentioned in stories that had nothing to do with the pawn business. What made it more confusing was the silence. Rick and Chumlee didn't talk much about the rumors. The pawn shop didn't release any big statement. The network behind the show stayed quiet too. That silence created more questions. People began to wonder if something really bad had happened. Something so big that even the show couldn't continue as normal. This is where curiosity starts to grow. When people feel like they're being left in the dark, they start looking for answers anywhere they can find them. Social media, YouTube videos, old interviews, fans started searching through everything. They wanted to find clues. They wanted to understand how two men who seemed so trustworthy could end up in such a strange and serious situation. The thing is, fame always brings pressure. When someone becomes famous, their lives change. They get more money, more attention, and more people trying to get close to them. Sometimes that attention is good, but other times it brings people who want to take advantage of them or pull them into bad situations. No one knows for sure if that's what happened to Rick and Chumlee, but it makes people wonder. Could the fame have changed them? Did the success of the show make them careless? Or were there always problems hiding behind the camera that no one noticed? These are the types of questions that started spreading fast, and the more people talked, the more theories began to grow. Some believed Rick was hiding things to protect the business. Others thought Chumlee had made mistakes that were finally catching up to him. There were also fans who refused to believe any of it, saying that the media was just twisting facts and blowing things out of proportion. But no matter which side you were on, one thing was clear. This was no longer just about a TV show. It was something much deeper. The biggest shock for most fans wasn't just the news itself, but the idea that maybe they never really knew the people behind the screen. It's easy to trust someone when you only see their best side. A few jokes here, a smart deal there, and suddenly they feel like old friends. But real life is different. Real people have flaws, secrets, and past mistakes. And when those things come to light, it changes everything. Even people who worked with them started to avoid questions. Some former employees of the pawn shop were asked by the press but said very little. That only added more mystery. What were they trying to hide? Why wouldn't they speak up? At this point, fans didn't just want gossip. They wanted the truth. They wanted to know what really happened, not just what the headlines were saying. The mix of silence, small facts, and big rumors made the whole thing feel like a puzzle with missing pieces. And the more you looked at it, the more you realized this was not just about one bad day or one small mistake. Something big was happening, and it had been building for a long time. People started watching old episodes again, looking for signs. They paid more attention to things Rick and Chumlee said. Some thought they noticed changes in their behavior over time. Others claimed they saw hints of trouble in the background. Whether those signs were real or imagined doesn't matter. What matters is how many people felt fooled. There's something sad about realizing the people you looked up to might not be who you thought they were. It's not just disappointment, it's a sense of loss. Because when someone's image breaks, the connection breaks too. You can't look at them the same way again. And yet, even with all the questions and shock, people are still talking. They're still hoping to hear the full story. Because deep down they want to believe that there's a reason. That maybe, just maybe, there's more going on than meets the eye. This isn't the end of the story. It's only the beginning of something bigger, something stranger, and something that will leave a mark on everyone who once believed in the show. A scandal so shocking it shook fans around the world. When the news started to break, it didn't just make headlines, it changed everything. For years, Pawn Stars had been a comfort to millions. People tuned in every week to watch the fun, the deals, and the drama in the pawn shop. The cast had become a part of their lives. Rick with his sharp business skills and Chumlee with his goofy charm were faces everyone recognized. They were the heart of the show, and the idea that something so huge could be happening behind the scenes was hard to believe. Fans never imagined that a show they trusted and loved would suddenly take a dark turn. At first, the news felt like something out of a bad dream. How could this be true? The people fans had watched for years, trusted, and laughed with were now at the center of a scandal. The more details came out, the more it seemed impossible. It was hard to wrap your mind around the idea that two people who were so well known for being genuine could have been hiding something this serious. What made it even worse was the fact that the story wasn't clear. There wasn't just one small mistake or a minor issue that could be explained away. This was bigger. It was messy. It was complicated. And no one knew exactly what was going on. As the days went on, more facts started to surface, but they didn't make the picture clearer. Instead, they only added to the confusion. With each new revelation, more questions popped up, and the mystery deepened. This wasn't just a simple case of a few rumors floating around. It was serious. The type of scandal that would change everything, the kind of story that makes people question everything they thought they knew. As fans tried to make sense of the situation, they found themselves in a whirlwind of emotions. They were confused, angry, and disappointed. They wanted answers, but every time they thought they were getting closer to the truth, something new would come up that made everything seem even more complicated. One of the biggest questions people had was, how could Rick and Chumlee, two people who seemed so genuine, be involved in something so serious? It was hard to believe that their entire public image could be a lie. After all, on TV they came across as honest, hard-working people. Rick was the guy who had the knowledge and the experience to run the pawn shop. Chumlee, despite his goofiness, always had a way of making the audience smile. They had become symbols of the American dream. The hard-working guys who made something big out of nothing. But now those images were shattered. Fans didn't know what to believe anymore. The people they thought they knew were suddenly strangers. This kind of scandal can be incredibly difficult for both the public and the people involved. Rick and Chumlee had spent years building their careers and their public personas. They had worked hard to earn the trust of their fans. But now it seemed like everything was falling apart. The show that had made them famous was now in danger of being overshadowed by the scandal. People weren't just talking about the next episode or the latest rare item brought into the shop. They were talking about the drama, the rumors, and the possibility that Rick and Chumlee's lives weren't as perfect as they appeared. As more information came to light, people started questioning the things they had seen on the show. Fans began to rewatch episodes, looking for any signs of trouble. Were there moments when something felt off? Did Rick or Chumlee say something that hinted at a bigger problem? People who once admired them now found themselves doubting everything. It was hard to believe that everything they thought they knew about the show and its stars could be wrong. This is where curiosity really started to take over. People wanted to know more. They wanted to understand the full story. What happened? How did it get to this point? And most importantly, who was responsible? As the news continued to spread, fans found themselves consumed with these questions. They wanted answers, they wanted to know the truth behind the headlines. And yet, for all the questions, the answers were still elusive. Rick and Chumlee remained quiet for a long time. The show itself stayed silent. This only fueled the fire. Fans were left to piece together the story themselves, and as they did, more theories began to emerge. Some people believed that Rick was hiding something. Others pointed fingers at Chumlee, thinking that he might be the one who had caused the mess, but no one knew for sure. The more people speculated, the more the story seemed to change. It was a mystery that no one could solve. It seemed like every new piece of information only raised more questions. For fans of the show, this whole situation was confusing and frustrating. They wanted to know the truth, but it was hard to separate fact from fiction. The more they read, the more they realized how little they actually knew about what had been going on behind the scenes. The more they thought about it, the more questions they had. It was like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces kept changing shape. At the same time, there was also a sense of disbelief. How could this be happening? How could the people they had watched on TV for so long suddenly be part of such a huge scandal? The reality of it was hard to accept. It wasn't just about the show anymore. It was about the people involved. Rick and Chumlee had become real people to their fans, and now those fans were left wondering if they had been fooled all along. But through all the confusion, there was still a sense of curiosity. People wanted to know what was really going on. They wanted to find out the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult that truth might be. And as more details slowly started to emerge, it seemed like there was still more to the story than anyone had expected. The deeper people dug, the more they found. But still, the full picture was far from clear. This wasn't just another celebrity scandal. It was something much bigger, something that affected not just the lives of Rick and Chumlee, but the entire legacy of the show. For fans, it wasn't just about watching the next episode. It was about understanding how their favorite show, and the people they admired, could be part of something so complicated and shocking. For Rick and Chumlee, the consequences were life-changing. When you're a public figure, especially one as loved as these two, every action you take comes under intense scrutiny. Fans have an expectation of who you are, what you represent, and how you behave. When that image gets shattered, the fallout can be massive. The two men who once smiled and made deals on TV were now facing something far more serious. The consequences of their actions weren't just going to go away. They weren't just dealing with a few rumors anymore. Their lives were about to change forever, and everyone who followed them on the show was about to see that change play out in real time. Rick Harrison, the steady business-minded star of the show, had built his reputation on trust. He was the guy who knew the value of rare items, the one who could haggle and make a deal with the best of them. He came across as the responsible one, the one who kept everything in order. Fans trusted him. They saw him as the leader, the wise and experienced pawnshop owner who had seen it all. But now, with the scandal hanging over him, that trust was beginning to crumble. People couldn't help but wonder, had Rick known more than he had let on? Had he been involved in something deeper, or was he just the victim of a situation he couldn't control? For Chumlee, the consequences were even more difficult to bear. He had always been the comedic relief on Pawn Stars. His goofy charm and innocent humor made him a fan favorite. People loved him because he was real. He wasn't afraid to show his flaws. He was the guy who made people laugh, who didn't take life too seriously, and who seemed to have a good heart. But now, Chumlee was being dragged into a serious legal mess. No one could ignore the fact that his actions had caught up with him, and the way his life was about to unfold was anything but funny. It's one thing to be part of a reality show where you play a role, but it's another thing entirely when the cameras stop rolling, and you're faced with real-life consequences. In Chumlee's case, this was his reality. The once carefree, lovable character had to now face a storm that was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The public wanted answers. They wanted to know if the funny guy they had loved on TV was someone they could still support, or if he was hiding something much darker behind that smile. As the situation escalated, more people began to wonder if this was all just part of a bigger picture, one that might have been brewing for a long time. The more the story unfolded, the more it became clear that these consequences weren't just about the show or the fans. They were about real-life impacts. This scandal had touched the lives of Rick and Chumlee in ways they hadn't anticipated. The legal issues, the media attention, and the damage to their reputation were just the beginning. These men had built careers, families, and lives around the image of being hardworking, honest, and fun. Now all of that was at risk. Fans who once admired Rick's ability to negotiate and Chumlee's hilarious antics were now faced with the uncomfortable reality that their heroes might not be who they thought. The damage was already done. The consequences of their actions were no longer just about rumors. They were about real-life consequences that would affect them for the rest of their lives. The feeling of betrayal was deep, and the public couldn't help but wonder how two men who once seemed so trustworthy could be part of something so troubling. The thing about scandals like this is that they don't just affect the people directly involved. They ripple out and affect everyone around them. Fans feel betrayed. People who worked with them feel betrayed. The entire legacy of Pawn Stars was now in jeopardy. What happened to the show's light-hearted spirit? What happened to the good-natured fun that fans had tuned in for? All of it was being overshadowed by something darker. The show that had once felt like a fun look at the pawn business was now the backdrop for a scandal that no one had seen coming. For Rick, the consequences went beyond just the media and the fans. His business, his reputation, and his family were all being dragged into the mess. Running a pawn shop in Las Vegas isn't easy. It's a tough business, filled with ups and downs. Now, on top of the regular challenges, he had to deal with the fallout from this scandal. The people who once looked up to him were now questioning his integrity. They were wondering if he had known about the trouble brewing beneath the surface. Had he been part of the problem? Or had he simply been caught up in a situation he couldn't escape? As for Chumlee, the consequences were perhaps even more personal. He had always been seen as the lovable goofball, the guy who made people laugh with his awkward charm. But now, that image was being replaced by something far darker. The public was no longer just seeing him as the funny guy from the show. They were seeing him through the lens of his mistakes and his legal troubles. People wanted to know how someone who seemed so innocent could end up in such a mess. Chumlee's personal life, which had always been a mystery to the public, was now under the microscope. Every detail about his past, his actions and his decisions was being exposed. It wasn't just about losing fans or facing public backlash. The consequences of this scandal would stay with both Rick and Chumlee for the rest of their lives. This was a moment in time that would define their careers, their legacies, and their reputations. Everything they had built over the years was now hanging in the balance. Whether they could recover from it was still uncertain. For the fans, this was a painful moment. They had to come to terms with the fact that their heroes weren't as perfect as they had imagined. The people they had supported for so long were now facing serious consequences. The fun, light-hearted atmosphere of Pawn Stars was now tainted by the reality of the situation. Fans who once admired Rick and Chumlee now found themselves questioning everything. Was it all just an act? Had they been fooled all along? The situation was far from over, and the consequences were only starting to unfold. Rick and Chumlee had no choice but to face the music. The public was watching, waiting to see how they would handle the fallout. Would they be able to rebuild their lives and careers, or would this scandal define them forever? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: the consequences of this scandal would change their lives in ways they could never have imagined. It's a strange feeling when you realize that the people you followed for so long, the ones you thought you knew, aren't exactly who you thought they were. Pawn Stars had always been a show about trust, about negotiating, about people who seemed to be in control of their lives. Rick Harrison, the pawn shop owner with years of experience, was the face of this trust. He made hard deals, shared stories, and taught lessons. He had this quiet strength about him that made you believe in the idea that hard work and knowledge would get you far. Then there was Chumlee, the lovable goofball. He was the fun sidekick who didn't take life too seriously but always seemed like he had a good heart. Fans loved him for his charm and humor, but when the news of the scandal hit, everything changed. Fans who had trusted Rick and Chumlee felt betrayed. They had spent years watching them, laughing with them, and even learning from them. Now those same people were forced to question everything. Were these two men really as trustworthy as they seemed, or had they been hiding something all along? What made this scandal so shocking wasn't just the fact that it happened, it was how it felt like it came out of nowhere. The world had seen Rick and Chumlee on TV for so long that it almost felt like they were part of the family. Fans could count on them to deliver the same jokes, the same deals, and the same charm week after week. It was comfortable, predictable, and most importantly, real. But behind that familiar routine, something was changing. The stories that people had once laughed about now seemed much darker. The fun atmosphere of the show suddenly felt forced, almost like it was hiding something. As the news unfolded, fans started realizing that they didn't know these men as well as they thought. Rick and Chumlee, who had seemed like family, now felt like strangers. One of the hardest parts about this scandal wasn't just the damage to Rick and Chumlee's reputations. It was the sense of confusion that came with it. People didn't know what to believe. Some felt betrayed, others were in denial, and some couldn't help but wonder how this could have been hidden for so long. The details of the situation didn't add up. Every time fans thought they were getting closer to the truth, something else would pop up that made everything feel more complicated. The silence from Rick and Chumlee only added to the tension. Why weren't they speaking up? What was really going on behind closed doors? As the days passed, the questions just kept piling up. Was this the end of the show, or would they be able to bounce back? There was a sense of fear in the air. Fans were worried that the show would be canceled, that the two men they had trusted would disappear from their screens forever. It wasn't just about the scandal itself, it was about the future of Pawn Stars. Would the show survive, or would it be overshadowed by the drama that had unfolded? For a lot of fans, it felt like they were losing something they had loved for so long. The uncertainty about what was going to happen next only made the situation worse. It wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. Would Rick and Chumlee's careers survive the scandal, or was this the end of their time on TV? But even as things seemed uncertain, there was still a glimmer of hope. Some fans held on to the idea that the story wasn't over yet. Maybe there was more to the situation than what was being reported. Maybe Rick and Chumlee weren't as guilty as everyone thought. After all, the media often twists the truth to fit a story. Right? Could it be that they were misunderstood? Could they bounce back? Fans wanted to believe that the people they had come to know and love were capable of redemption. They didn't want to accept the idea that the fun, light-hearted show they had enjoyed for so long could end in scandal. The possibility of redemption, the idea that things could turn around, kept people on edge. The truth was still unclear, and that sense of uncertainty was what kept everyone coming back for more. But no matter how much people wanted to believe in the best possible outcome, the reality of the situation was impossible to ignore. The scandal wasn't going to disappear overnight. The damage to Rick and Chumlee's reputations was already done. There were serious legal issues involved, and the public wasn't going to forget what had happened. For some, the trust had been broken beyond repair. Even if they tried to move on, people would always remember the scandal. It was going to hang over them, no matter what they did. The damage had been done, and there was no easy way to fix it. As the days went by, it became clear that the situation wasn't just affecting Rick and Chumlee, it was affecting everyone involved with the show. The other cast members, the crew, the producers, and the fans all had to face the fallout. The once united front of Pawn Stars was now fractured. Everyone had to decide how they felt about what had happened. Would they continue to support Rick and Chumlee, or would they turn their backs on them? Would the show continue without them, or would it be cancelled altogether? The uncertainty of what would happen next was something no one could ignore. Everyone had to wait and see what would unfold, but it was clear that nothing would be the same again. The public wasn't just questioning the actions of Rick and Chumlee, they were questioning the entire system that had allowed this to happen. How could they have missed the signs? How could the people running the show have let it go on for so long? It wasn't just about one or two mistakes, it was about a system that had failed to protect its stars and the fans who trusted them. People were angry, and that anger only made the situation feel more intense. The fallout wasn't just about Rick and Chumlee's mistakes, it was about a bigger failure, one that affected everyone involved. Through all of this, one question loomed large: could Rick and Chumlee recover from this scandal, or was it the end of their careers? The uncertainty was what kept people guessing. Fans didn't know what to think. They didn't know if they should still watch Pawn Stars or if they should abandon it altogether. The future of the show, and the future of Rick and Chumlee, was uncertain. But one thing was clear: the scandal had changed everything. The scandal surrounding Rick Harrison and Chumlee was a turning point for the show. What had once been a favorite for millions of viewers now faced an uncertain future. As the story unfolded, people began to question the very foundation of the show. Could Pawn Stars survive this scandal? Could Rick and Chumlee ever be the same again? These were the burning questions on everyone's mind. Fans who had been loyal to the show for years now found themselves caught in a storm of confusion. They had trusted Rick and Chumlee, and now they didn't know what to think anymore. It wasn't just about the show anymore. It was about their lives, their careers, and their reputations. This scandal had gone beyond the TV screen and into their real lives, affecting everything they had built over the years. At the heart of it all was the damage to their personal lives. Rick Harrison had worked hard to build a business and a brand that people respected. He was known for his sharp mind and his ability to make the right deals. He had built a reputation for being smart, responsible, and reliable. That image was now in jeopardy. The public perception of Rick was no longer just about the businessman who ran a pawn shop. It was now about the man who had been caught up in a scandal. Fans who had admired him for his no-nonsense approach to business were now questioning if they could trust him. Could they still look up to him? Or had he let them down in ways they couldn't understand? Chumlee, on the other hand, had always been the comic relief on Pawn Stars. He was the fun, goofy guy who didn't take things too seriously. His humor and charm had made him a favorite among fans. But now that image was being replaced by something much darker. Chumlee was no longer just the lovable sidekick. He was the man at the center of a controversy. Fans who had once laughed at his jokes now found themselves asking if he was hiding something. Was he really as innocent as he seemed, or had he been part of something far worse? This shift in perception was incredibly hard for fans to come to terms with. Chumlee was the one who had made them laugh, the one who had been the light-hearted part of the show. Now that very image was being shattered. The thing about scandals like this is that they don't just affect the people involved, they affect the people around them too. Rick and Chumlee had built careers, families, and friendships around the image they had created on the show. That image was now at risk. For Rick, the scandal meant that his business could suffer. His reputation was on the line, and people who had trusted him were now wondering if he was hiding something. His entire business was built on trust, and now that trust was in question. Fans didn't just want to know the truth about what happened. They wanted to know if they could still believe in the man who had been their guide through countless deals. Chumlee, meanwhile, was facing a very different kind of fallout. The fun-loving guy who had always been there to entertain and make people smile was now the subject of serious public scrutiny. It wasn't just about the media, it was about the personal relationships he had built over the years. The people who had once admired him for his humor and his down-to-earth personality were now wondering if they had been fooled. Fans who had supported him through thick and thin now found themselves torn. Could they still root for him, or had they been mistaken in believing in him? What made this whole situation even more complicated was the lack of answers. Rick and Chumlee weren't speaking out about the scandal. The silence only made things worse. Fans wanted answers, but they weren't getting them. The longer the silence lasted, the more the public filled in the gaps with their own theories and assumptions. Was there something more to the story than what was being reported? Or was this just the tip of the iceberg? The lack of clarity added to the confusion. Fans didn't know what to believe anymore. The uncertainty was maddening. The more they heard, the less they understood. It felt like the truth was just out of reach, and it was driving people crazy. As the media circus continued, more details about the scandal started to leak out. The problem was that these details didn't make the situation any clearer. Instead, they just added to the chaos. Every time someone thought they were getting closer to the truth, something new would come out that made everything seem more complicated. It was hard to know what to believe. Some people believed that Rick and Chumlee were guilty, while others thought they were being unfairly targeted. The truth was elusive, and that made the situation all the more frustrating. But the thing about a scandal like this is that it doesn't just disappear. It doesn't go away overnight. The damage was already done, and it was going to take a long time for things to heal. For Rick and Chumlee, the road to redemption wouldn't be easy. They would have to rebuild their reputations and prove to the public that they were still the same people they had once admired. That process would take time, and it would require them to address the scandal head-on. The public wasn't going to forget about what had happened. They weren't going to forgive easily. But could Rick and Chumlee come back from this? Could they regain the trust of the people who had supported them for so long? The question hung in the air, unanswered. For the fans who had once loved the show, this scandal represented a loss. It wasn't just about the show being tainted, it was about the people they had come to know and trust no longer being the people they thought they were. It was about the disappointment of seeing their heroes fall from grace. Fans didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know whether to continue watching Pawn Stars or to turn their backs on it completely. The uncertainty was eating away at them. They wanted to know if Rick and Chumlee could recover, if the show could ever be the same again. At the same time, there was a sense of curiosity. People wanted to know what would happen next. Would Rick and Chumlee be able to make a comeback? Would they speak out and explain their side of the story? Would the public forgive them, or would they be forever marked by the scandal? The questions kept coming, and they kept people coming back for more. Even though the situation was messy, people were still invested in the outcome. They wanted to know the truth. They wanted to see how it would all play out. The curiosity was strong, and it kept everyone on edge, waiting for the next chapter in this unfolding drama. The scandal had turned everything upside down. The show that had once been a comfort to millions was now a reminder of how quickly things could change. Rick and Chumlee had to find a way to navigate this new reality, and the world was watching, waiting to see how they would handle it. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the future. Would they be able to turn the page and write a new chapter in their lives, or would this scandal define them forever?